All right, guys. Today we are going to talk about the importance of rhythm and cycles and patterns and seasons in our life, okay? And full transparency and vulnerability, this is coming at the peak of day 3 of my cycle, okay? And so, what I love about the podcast and I guess any content is that you can just be real in the moment with whatever's going on. And I do this in hopes that it's going to help someone else and their path and make the suffering a little bit less. And so today's episode might speak a little bit more to women, but if you're a man listening to this is going to help you understand the women in your life more. But we're also going to talk about just not only just the female cycle, but just human cycles altogether. Okay. Now, I've been speaking a lot more about this in my content lately and with my clients, especially, mainly just because I've seen how much a difference it has made in my life. And I'll be honest, I noticed a much bigger difference once I left my corporate job, right? Because, when you're working on a strict schedule that's someone else's schedule, um, it doesn't really leave any space for variable or any space to like get to know what really aligns with your body properly because you're on their timeline. And for the record, you know, our bodies do really good on habit and routine, okay? Like we will always get the max output when we're following some type of pattern and schedule, okay? However, I do think it's important to identify the schedule and habit that works best for you within the constraints of whatever you are doing in life. Okay. So obviously, if I work for someone and they are open from 9 to 5, I have to work within their window of 9 to 5. Okay. But how can I get to know my internal clock, my body, my system to the best of my ability so that I can maximize how I'm showing up between 9 and 5? Okay. And so, yeah, like I said, when I left my last career, which to be honest, like there was a cycle, but I was on a 6 and 4. So essentially, I'd work Monday through Saturday, pretty long hours. And then the next week, I'd work Monday to Thursday and have a 3-day weekend. And so I was on more of a 2-week cycle, if that makes sense. So again, you learn to adapt to that over time. But if I'm being honest with you, my days weren't really structured too evenly. Like the days where I worked the later shift, which would usually be a 1 to 8, I obviously could sleep in a little bit more. The days where I worked 8:30 to 4:30, I had to be up early. And so again, you adjust over time, but because of the constraints of when the business was open and the hours I had to work, I never really got to understand my own cycle. On top of that, I was burnt out. I was disconnected from myself. I was neglecting my needs. I was trying to prove my worth to everybody. All these things you guys hear me talk about. I was doing all the things. And so, again, that takes you further and further away from what your true nature is and understanding yourself. So, when I left my job, I had about 9 months off. And so I went traveling for a while. I came back and I really had, I will say the luxury of figuring out what my body responds to best and what type of sleep worked well with me. When were my eating patterns the best? And I just kind of tried to figure out what was really great for my body and what got me the best results. Okay. And to be honest, the time when it really started to click is moving through the seasons from summer to winter. Okay. So, of course, before when I was working, the hours of the store don't vary between summer and winter, right? The store hours are the store hours, no matter if it's bright at 6 a.m. or it doesn't get bright till 9 a.m. Okay. And so, this past year, when I had the ability to create my own schedule and because I was building my own business, now I really got to play with this concept. And I didn't even really do it intentionally. It just kind of happened because the summers, I was up at 6 a.m. every morning, no problem. For anyone who doesn't know, I'm in Alberta, Canada. And so we have in the summers really long days. The sun can sometimes come up at around 4:30 and it won't go down till 11 p.m., when we're at the peak of it. So we have really long days in the summer. And in the dead of winter, the sun sometimes won't come out till about 9:30, and it will be gone by about 4:30. So we have big variances depending on the season. And then obviously it tapers off and gradually shifts as we go through each season. And we have 4 very distinct seasons. Cold ass winter, muddy, rainy, bloomy spring, pretty decent summers. It's a shorter summer season, but it gets hot. We're in Celsius, but we can have mid 30 summers sometimes, at least, about a month of that. Fall starts to cool off, the leaves fall, the trees die off, and then back to winter. So we have very distinctive seasons. And so I think that also plays into it a lot, or I noticed it more a lot this year because, we're not in a place where it's like, California, where it's hot all year long. And I know it will vary, but we really get a difference in energy based on the season. And so this last transition from summer to winter, again, because I didn't have to abide by anyone else's schedule, I really got to see how my body adapted. And very, very obviously, my body's circadian rhythm adapted with the natural changes of light and dark. Okay. And so if you don't know what the circadian rhythm is, to keep it very simple, it's exactly that. It is the rhythm of sleeping when it's dark and being awake when it's light. It's also the rhythm of, if you dive into it deeper, they say like you should only eat when the light's out and you shouldn't eat when it's dark. Okay. This goes back to before artificial light existed, okay? And, they talk about how if you took 30 people out of society now, placed them on a mountain, obviously with no technology, no phones, no anything, within like a day, everyone's sleep cycle would adapt to be the same because we'd be naturally connected back to nature and we'd be following the cycles of the sun and the sunset, sunrise, all that kind of stuff, okay? So we as humans are naturally tuned to have a circadian rhythm. And, I listened to a podcast, would have been in 2023. I first listened to it. Maybe it's 2024. Anyways, if you haven't listened to it, it's on the Diary of a CEO podcast. And he was interviewing, I think she's the lead scientist for Whoop. And Whoop is a platform that essentially monitors your heart rate variability, your sleep quality. It's just a well-being app. Really great. I haven't used it personally, but I have some clients who have. And it tracks essentially just what your body's doing, how your nervous system is adapting to things, gives you a bunch of metrics. And she said in this interview that the shift workers, so people who work shift work, obviously meaning you work at night, so that could be doctors who have to wake up overnight. Out here, oil patch workers who have to work night shift. On average, people who work night shift die 15 years earlier than everybody else. And the reason being the hours between 10 p.m. and 4 a.m. are detrimental to your quality of life, to your nervous system capacity, to your ability to fight off disease, to your emotional regulation. It is just so impactful when you're up between those hours. And I remember hearing that when I first listened to that episode, and I was already on the path of getting aligned with light and dark, but that just really hit home for me. And so I kind of started to surrender to that idea of like, okay, so when it's dark, can I go to sleep? And when it's light, can I just naturally wake up? And I stopped using an alarm clock. Again, I know not everyone has this luxury, okay, but I just want to put this out there for you to think about how you can integrate this into your life, okay? And what I noticed is as soon as the days started getting shorter, meaning we had more dark, my body naturally wanted to do the same thing, okay? Even if I was getting great rest, even if I was having really productive days and I was doing all the things to set up a good sleep, working out during the day, regulating my nervous system actively, stopping to eat by a certain time or stop eating by a certain time, you know what I mean? Like doing all the things, not consuming any crazy content before bed, staying away from the screen before bed, like not checking my phone first thing in the morning, all these things I was doing, even if I was on top of all that stuff, naturally, when the days started getting shorter, I wanted more sleep. And so I started giving myself that. And I could immediately tell a difference in how I navigated that winter compared to how I've navigated winters of the past. Okay. I was way more rested. I was way more productive. I didn't have, the quote unquote winter blues, because in my honest opinion, I think that's part of the reason people get the winter blues is like where I'm from specifically, we have long winters, so it can be a little bit dread. But when you are trying to push against the laws of nature within your body, that is going to push your nervous system to break sooner. So again, it's winter. It's technically hibernation season, right? Yet we're still pushing for the same amount of productivity. We're pushing for the same amount of hours of work. We're pushing to there's this whole thing about New Year's, January 1st, the Gregorian calendar. I've never really bought into it. Okay. I think true New Year's starts in the spring, more aligned with the lunar calendar. Okay. When things start to blossom. But if we take into account all those things, it's cold, there's less light, and we're trying to force this more energy. It's going against the grain of nature. And so then I think that's why people have winter blues more often, is because not only is it just because it's cold and there's less light, it's because we're going against the grain. And I mean, that's a way deeper issue. Obviously, that's capitalism and society as a whole. I don't think I convince anyone with this one podcast to change up the way people shop and retail and all these things. But again, I just think that's the truth. And so when I started to see it for myself, how naturally my body adapted to light and dark because I had the luxury to figure this out, I realized how important what it was for me to continue on this cycle of understanding the patterns within my body and using that to my advantage. Because again, you guys know I specialize in working with people who are burnt out. And so when we think about burnout there's so many aspects to it, to, having a lot of things on our plate, having too many tabs open, being out of alignment, being disconnected within. Part of that also goes back to is we're not listening to our bodies and the natural cyclical nature that exists within each one of us, right? Again, I talk about this with the nervous system all the time. If we go back to days when we were living in tribes and living in nature, and the only outcome of success was to have to survive in nature, like that was the definition of success at that time. Like, you can listen to anyone who studies the nervous system from a scientific perspective. Our nervous system hasn't evolved much beyond that, which in simple terms means our ability to adapt to stress and handle stress hasn't evolved much since those days when we lived out in nature. Yet today we're facing perpetual stress, not necessarily from the same way, like a bear chasing you, but from your phone and all the things we're seeing around the world with war and destruction and people fighting and the arguments and people cancel culture, all this crap. That's perpetual stress that's coming at us all day long. But again, if we go back to the days when we lived in nature, we just had to outrun the bear. And once the bear was gone, we were good, right? Now it's not outrunning the bear. Now it's avoiding the news and avoiding your negative Nancy neighbor and avoiding people who want to cancel you because you have a different perspective, and avoiding all the agendas and all the things. Okay. So again, going down this path, it made me want to understand cycles and seasons more. And so I bring this up because, I see a lot of people right now who just went through January, and I'm going to be honest, despite what I just said about January 1st not being the real new year, I have felt a shift in energy this January. And more from the fact that, I talk about it so much. 2025 is a 9 year. It's a year of letting go, releasing old patterns, self-leadership. I'm seeing so many people tested with that right now. And so it's like the 9 energy came in with like a bang, and it was like, all right, what do you want to let go of? Right. So I have seen the shift that way. But from a production standpoint, I have seen a lot of people, me included, feeling a little stuck in certain areas, but defaulting to that energy of wanting to go. Like, oh, why aren't we moving fast? Why aren't we charging ahead? What's happening? And I've had to catch myself and be like, but Mintu, it's winter. It's winter. Like, for anyone who lives where I live, it is minus 35 outside right now. That ground is frozen as fuck. And so what that means is if I went outside right now to try and plant a seed in the ground, A, probably wouldn't even be able to plant it because the ground's like, you're not getting into me. And even if I did, it's not going to grow. It's not, right? It won't grow. It's not suitable environment for a seed to blossom, right? So then if we go back to if you've been maybe feeling stuck in some areas, if you've been wanting to push forward on some things, if you just want to start making things happen, but it's not clicking, this is where understanding seasons and cycles is so important. I was talking with a client yesterday and she's been in a strategic operations project manager position for decades. She's done really high level stuff. And she was telling me that, they would look sometimes at their team's production and seeing what got done at the end of January versus seeing what was done by the end of March usually wasn't that big of a difference. And it was just something they had to come to accept. Like everyone would be in office January, February, March, but if you looked at the amount of stuff that actually got done between January and March, it wasn't that big. Okay. So it just goes to show people are going to move a little bit slower. People don't have as much energy again, but then we are putting on these expectations and these pressures to perform the same we would in Q2 or Q3. It's just not realistic, and that's why I'm bringing this up today is because we have to understand that there's seasons and there's cycles. And instead of forcing them to be done the way we want, how can we learn to work with them? Right? How can we learn to study Mother Nature? How can we learn to study the energies that are way more powerful than anything man-made? Okay? Like anything man-made existed way before us, way before our civilization, these energies and patterns and cycles. Like we see what going against the grain gets us. Okay, guys. Like, I don't think we have to question the disarray that our society is in right now. And for a reason, this is what we're supposed to experience as souls and as humanity right now. But we've gotten so lost as far as connecting to nature and being grounded. And look what that's getting us. Okay. Not that it's all bad, but there's definitely room for improvement, right? The fact that burnout is so normalized, the fact that relationships are more challenging probably than they've ever been, the fact that people's health is we're coming up with new sicknesses every day because again we've gotten so far away from healing in nature and have started relying on pharmaceuticals that are man-made and all these things to just bandage the approach versus actually healing the person. Like we're a little disorganized. Okay. So while we can't necessarily fix everything, again, it's about how can we play into what we can tune into ourselves, which to me lately has been understanding cycles, seasons, and patterns. Okay. So, I would look at maybe where you're feeling a little stuck right now. And again, this is coming out in January or February, sorry, of 2025. And see if you've been forcing an energy that's not in alignment with what the season is. And if you have been, I'd ask you how's that feel? I'm going to argue not good, right? And I'm speaking from experience. I woke up in the middle of the night the other night tossing and turning about work. Full transparency, guys. Not perfect, like I'm still going to have to deal with these things. I don't deal with it often and I have a lot of tools, but I'm still human. I woke up in the middle of the night the other night, mind spinning about work and unconsciously. Like I didn't want to wake up thinking about that, but it just happened. Luckily, my boyfriend was there and he, we had a good talked me off the ledge, and I was able to go back to sleep and we were fine. But again, there's something because I have decades of conditioning of forcing and pushing during a season that really doesn't quite align with that. And, that's just what happened to wake me up in the middle of my sleep. Now, here's the thing, just because this might not be a season of the seed blossoming doesn't mean we sit back and do nothing. We still have to show up. We still have to prep the seeds. We still have to decide what seeds we're planting. Or maybe, we still plant, we just know that they're not going to bloom yet and we don't expect that. We can still go out there and curate where we're going to make the garden and get that ready, but we don't expect it to blossom just because the conditions aren't ideal for it yet. But just because it's not blossoming now doesn't mean it's not going to, right? And I think that's the key with anything, whatever you're trying to work towards. A financial goal, a career goal, a relationship goal, health, whatever, is that it comes down to planting the seeds. And if you do that, when the timing is right, when the conditions are right, when you've learned what you've needed to learn to sustain that blossom, that's when it will happen. And even with that, thinking about that, again, full transparency, I was expecting a little bit more of a bigger trajectory for the first 2 months of the year in a certain area of my business. Again, hasn't quite taken it off the way I thought it would. However, not for 1 second have I doubted that. Not for 1 second have I thought, is it not going to come? It's just, surprise, surprise, not working out the way I want it to. It's working out the way it's supposed to. And because I'll be honest, my energy right now, because of the season, I still need 8-9 hours of sleep a night right now. And I'm not afraid to admit that. I probably would have been ashamed in the past because I was on the board of being in my masculine and I was gun ho and, whatever, not listening to my body at all. And I would have been fine, quote unquote, fine on 6 or 7 hours of sleep. No, not anymore. I need 8, 9, sometimes 10 hours of sleep. Okay. And I'm not ashamed to say that. And so because my body is so adapted to shorter days right now, even if I wanted all this massive growth in the first 2 months, the way my body is aligning to sleep wouldn't even give me the energy to be able to execute said thing that I want. So again, if I trust in nature, if I trust in the divine and the energies that are much more powerful than me, it's saying, Minh-Thu, you're still in hibernation season. So you don't need to be doing any more than you're doing right now. This is the season of rest. This is the season of preparing for spring. This is the season of getting you ready, getting you in the best condition and shape so that once everything starts to blossom, once everything starts to get cracking real quick, you've already done what you need to do to be ready to work with that, right? That's where the faith comes in. That's where the belief comes in. And that's where just following the facts of seasons comes into place. Okay. Now, the other cycle I'm going to transition to right now that is also really important to focus on is, ladies, our menstrual cycle. Now, again, men, if you're listening, this is not where you shut off. I would encourage you to keep listening to this for your wife, for your girlfriend, for your sister, for your mom, just to understand, for your coworker, for your boss, for your friend. Like, I will say this time and time again, our menstrual cycle is the most important cycle to humanity because none of you would be here without it. Okay? None of us would exist if it wasn't for a menstrual cycle. Okay? And the fact that we don't take that into consideration in our society is wild. I'm not surprised. Obviously, they do anything they can to keep just to dumb us down. Let's just be honest. We're more controllable when we're not in our power. And if we honored the cycle of menstruation in society, we would be way more aligned, connected, stronger, emotionally regulated as men and women if we did this and if we understood the importance of it. But we're not at that point, and that's okay, but I'm here to talk about it. So, ladies, if your menstrual cycle is not a part of your success strategy and your productivity strategy, you're doing yourself a disservice right now. And I'm not saying that with any judgment because that was me for years. I really started just to use this within the last couple of years. Okay. But we have cycles within our cycle. We have phases that we go through. And I'll probably do another episode where I get deep into what each of those phases are. Okay. That'd be a really good episode to cover for us. But We have a week where we're super upbeat, productive, have lots of energy. We have another week where we're a little bit more low vibe and we're a little bit more emotional and our sleep's not going to be as good. We have the week where we're detoxing, which is when we bleed and we are losing iron and we are shedding energies from the last 30 days and we are detoxing and we were, you know what I mean? Like, but yet we're expecting again to get the same amount of productivity throughout the entire month, whether we're our hormones are working with us and we're on 10, or whether we're, sorry, we're bleeding out. You know what I mean? Like, and again, I'm on day 3 of my cycle right now, and full transparency. And I talked to my boyfriend the night before last night, it was day 1, and he's like, well, how was today? And I'm like, I mean, I had and mine came early, you know what I mean? So I didn't expect it to come that day. And he's like, well, so how was your day? And I said, I had so much I wanted to get done. I said, but I, I couldn't, like, I just couldn't. I said, and I don't even really remember what I got done today. Like that. And for guys, you might not know, but we can go through a multitude of different symptoms when our period starts. But I was like, I don't really remember what I got done today. I had so much brain fog. And he goes, oh, is it that bad? I said, yeah, you think about if you got stabbed and you were bleeding out, how much would you remember and how much productivity would you get done? And he was like, oh, when you put it that way. But ladies, we have to think of it that way. And I know that might sound dramatic, but it's true. Like, because we live with it every month, we downplay what's actually happening. But it's literally like if someone got stabbed on the street and they started bleeding out and you go, hey, I know you're bleeding, but like, do you think you're still going to be able to get those notes done for the 1:00 meeting? Like, again, can I have those on my desk before 11? Or like, how ridiculous is that? Right? Like how ridiculous. And honestly, in my opinion, I think the first 3 to 4 days of your period, you should be resting. That's my personal opinion. And again, I know you may not be able to rest completely, but you should be minimizing output because you are losing, like you are shedding, you are detoxing. Like think about like a fighter cutting weight. Okay. I don't know why that came to my mind, but like you are literally losing so much energy in that moment. You should be doing nothing. That's the best way to honor that season. Again, just like honoring winter and honoring the hibernation and regrouping and recalibrating and restoring your energy levels to prepare for spring. That's the same thing of when you're bleeding. You should be taking that time to restore and nourish yourself and comfort yourself and do what you need to honor your body while it's going through this very sacred ritual. And then once you get out of it, things will start to pick up again. And then now you can tap back into the productivity and what you need to get done and going through that, right? But ladies, we need to understand these cycles because again, I have had this conversation with multiple clients lately. They'll come to me on a session like, oh, Minto, I just had such a bad day. I got mad at this person and I was irritable about this and I said this and oh, I couldn't keep things on track. And I sat in front of my computer for 3 hours and I barely got anything done. And like, I just don't know why I had this day. And the first question I ask is, what day are you on in your cycle? And they go, oh, right? And then we look it up and then we correlate it with whatever phase they're in. And then we read up on the standard symptoms of that phase. And then they can take a breath because they know it's not because they're lazy and it's not because they're broken. It's because that's the nature of their hormones. It's the way we were designed. It was the way we were created. And ladies, we have on average 28-day hormonal cycle. Men have like a 24-hour hormonal cycle. Like, yeah, they go through some seasonal stuff too, but all in all, like they can restore testosterone in 24 hours. We have 28 days and we're here trying to keep up with them. Now, the good thing about where we're at in society these days is we can keep up with men in a lot of areas. I'm referring to business specifically, but we have accomplished a lot of great things. We show that we can be great leaders and great executives and CEOs. Like we can do it as women, but if we try to do it the same way as men, we are not going to be able to sustain that competitive edge. Okay. Because we are designed differently, right? The same tips you'd give a doctor to advance his career are not going to be the same tips you give a teacher to advance their career. They're two very different industries, right? How you tell them to build their business, how you tell them to show up, they're completely different. They can't use the exact same tools in both to get the same outcome or to even get to whatever outcome they want. So it's the same thing with men and women. And I've heard clients who, have a spouse and they're like, oh, my husband can get up at 5:30 every morning and go to the gym, and I feel guilty when I can't get up with him. I'm like, man, because you're not supposed to be able to. Maybe in some seasons you're going to be able to keep up with that. Maybe certain weeks you'll be able to keep up with that. But he's on a 24-hour hormone cycle. You're on a 28-day. And so if you try to keep up with that, you're going to burn the fuck out. Okay? Again, my last career, I was heavily in my masculine. I was on a mental level keeping up with these guys on their schedule, but my body was fighting me, being like, what are we doing? This is not in alignment with our feminine nature. This is not in alignment with your cycle and your womb and all these things. And again, burnt out. Right? So this is my point in talking about cycles and patterns and seasons, is that they're everywhere. They're everywhere for us to follow, whether that be the circadian rhythm, light and dark. That's one cycle to follow. Whether that be seasons, fall, summer, winter, spring. That's another cycle that we could follow. Whether it be women, our menstrual cycle, another very important one to follow. These are all divine nature rhythms. And if we can start using them to our advantage and working with them, that's going to help us be more sustainable, to have more longevity, have a better quality of life. And it doesn't mean, and again, I know if you're working within certain parameters, again, working hours, etc., like I know there's things you have to work with. So it doesn't mean we have to give up our stance in society altogether, but we just need to become more aware of these things and use them to our advantage and our consideration more often. That's what they're here for. And because I can tell you, I'm in the thick of it right now. If you try and fight it, right? Like, I will be honest, have I got as much done in these past 3 days as I wanted to? No, I have not. Okay. In 2 weeks from now, even in a week from now, am I going to even remember these 3 days existed? No. Right. So I could sit here right now and beat myself up, and don't get me wrong. I've had moments of teetering into that space. Again, I told you I woke up in the middle of the night the other night and needed a pep talk. Right. So I'm not completely exempt, but I don't sit in that space for long. I let it come up. I acknowledge it. I write. I talk to someone. I give myself a bit of a check, right? I check myself. And then I go, okay, yeah, let me play into the powers that are bigger than me. Let me surrender to this. Because the other side of it is you don't have to, right? You could listen to like, Mindy, this is a dumb episode. What are you talking about, right? I'm hoping you don't think that, but you could say there and say like, no, I'm going to keep forcing my way through winter. I'm going to keep breaking my back no matter where I'm at in my menstrual cycle. I'm going to keep staying up super late, waking up really early, even though my body's deprived. And my guess is you've probably already been doing that. And I want to ask you how that's going. How's that working for you? Because I've been there. I've done it. I didn't listen to any rhythms. I avoided all the cycles and I burnt out hard. And when we're in that place, that's when things become more negative. That's when we get more cynical. We're less patient. We're more judgmental. We get digestion issues. We don't sleep well. We have breaks in our relationship. We can't problem solve on a high level. We can't do anything except lay on the couch and order takeout. You know what I mean? We cancel our plans with our friends because we're so exhausted. Like when those start to happen, that's a result of ignoring your needs, of ignoring your internal clock, and of ignoring these divine human cycles that we were all born to follow. So all I would say is I want to encourage you that just start somewhere basic. Just start with, if you want to learn how to work with this, men and women, start with the light and dark cycle, right? When am I going to sleep? When am I waking up? Am I awake between those very detrimental hours between 10 and 4? And if I am, I gotta nip that in the bud ASAP. Like I need to be going to sleep before 10 at the latest, and I need to be sleeping right till 4. And if I'm not, I need to do something about it. Ladies, I would say the most important place you got to start working with the cycle is your menstrual cycle. Okay. And I will say quickly, if you're on birth control, it's going to throw that off. I have some pretty strong opinions on birth control, and I just think anything that takes us against our natural clock is not most supportive to our overall well-being. Now I know there are other things, why you may be using birth control, but I would just ask you to really consider and ask questions about that. If it's not actually for birth control anymore, see if there's other methods you can use. Anything else that you can use besides that, because it's our biological clock, our menstrual clock is like our superpower. And so anytime we're getting away from that and understanding the cycles of our body, I truly think we are cutting off part of our superpower. So ladies, I would start there. And if you aren't on birth control and you're pretty regular, get an app, a tracker. I use P Tracker, letter P Tracker. It's free. There's a paid version as well too, which will track your cycle. You can track your symptoms. It'll tell you what phase you're in. It'll tell you where you're ovulating. And it's such important information. Okay. And once you can start to track that, you can start to monitor, like, okay, where am I at? How does this correlate with my moods? How does this correlate with my productivity? If you have big projects, you can schedule big projects around the part of your cycle where you're going to have more energy. If you know you're going to be like in your luteal phase, which is right before your period, which you're going to be more low energy, you can maybe schedule to have a more empty schedule that time. Like, you can really play with this and use it to your advantage to maximize your productivity. Okay. And then, aside from those, again, go with the seasons. If you feel like things are stuck, if you feel like things are moving, tap into whatever season it is, and ask yourself, what would spring call out of me? What would winter ask of me? What would summer ask of me? What would fall ask of me? And play into those energies. They're here for us. I know it might sound woo-woo, but it's not, guys. It's science-based. It's factual. It's physical. It's material. We're witnessing it every day when we look outside. Like, again, far beyond any power of any human is what Mother Nature provides. So we already see what going against the grain gets us. What can happen if we start to work with it? So that was my rant for today. I hope it made sense. I'm just really speaking from like real life experience because I've been dealing with it this week and going through it, and I'm not perfect. I experience the same things that everybody else. Again, the thing I would just say is that my window of that dance between, you know, uh, stressing out and not stressing out has just gotten a lot smaller. And every time we grow, every time we hit a new season, you're going to be tested on what that dance is like for you, within you, managing that stress. And again, just the more you get to know yourself, the more you get to understand how your body works and what it responds well to and what it doesn't, the better you're going to set yourself up for success. And the better you're going to self yourself up to just truly enjoy this journey of life. Because none of us are exempt from stress. None of us are exempt from hard times. They're going to keep coming. That's inevitable. But just how can you give yourself the chance to just be able to ride those highs and lows with as little pain as possible? Pain's going to be part of the ride. It's inevitable. But just navigate it in a way where you're able to just really surrender to the moment and enjoy the journey to the best of your ability. So that's my rant today. Learn the cycles, learn the seasons, learn the patterns, and set yourself up for success. All right, guys, we'll see you in the next episode.